I have told this story maybe 100 times now, to dock crews, to my own hatchlings, to strangers who buy me a drink and don't believe a word until I get to the end. And every time I get to a certain moment and I have to stop, I have to put my glass down, because even now, after all these cycles, the memory of it makes my chest go tight in a way I don't have good words for. My name is Ombric Vale. I am Celtborn, which means I am short, I am slow to anger, and I have spent 41 cycles of my life keeping the docks of HFY Station from falling apart. I am not a soldier. I am not a hero. I move cargo. I fix loaders. I sign off on refit contracts and I make sure nobody dies stupid on my watch. But I was there. That's the whole reason anybody listens to me. I was there the day everyone laughed at the tiny human girl. And I was there when the thing we all feared most on that station looked down at her and called her something none of us ever expected to hear. Let me start from the beginning. Let me tell it the way it happened. HFY Station is not a nice place. I want to be honest about that before I tell you anything else. It's a salvage yard, a refit dock, and a fuel stop bolted onto the bones of an old mining rig, hanging in orbit around a dead brown gas giant on the wrong edge of civilized space. The kind of place where the law is whatever the station boss decides it is that day, and the boss changes about twice a cycle. The air always smells faintly of coolant and burnt metal. The lights flicker in Habring 3 because nobody has ever gotten around to fixing the wiring, and honestly at this point, I think we'd all miss the flickering if it stopped. There are 40-some species that pass through on a regular rotation. Traders, wreckers, miners coming off long hauls with pockets full of credits and nowhere better to spend them. It's loud. It's crowded. It's the kind of loud and crowded that never really stops, just gets quieter around the third shift when the drunks finally give out. And into all of that, one gray cycle walked a human. Now I want you to understand something. Back then, humans were still new to most of us out on the rim. You heard stories. Everybody had heard stories. This new species from a heavy world, small but stubborn, that had clawed its way up into the stars faster than anyone thought a soft little thing had any right to. But hearing stories and actually seeing one are two very different experiences. The first time I saw her, I thought she was a child. She came off a battered independent freighter called the Longshore with a crew of 6, and she was the smallest of all of them. She barely came up to my shoulder, and I am not a tall creature. She had dark hair pulled back tight, skin the color of warm sand, and a bag over one shoulder that looked like it weighed more than she did. Her name, I would learn later, was Myra Das. She was 19 of her years old, which I understood to be very young for her kind, and she had signed onto the Longshore as a junior systems tech, which is a polite way of saying she fixed whatever nobody else wanted to fix. And the whole dock laughed at her. I don't mean cruelly, not at first. It was more like the laugh you give when a small animal tries to do something big. She had to jump, actually jump, to reach the release latch on her own cargo pallet. A Braxton dockhand next to me, big fellow, 4 arms, made a joke I won't repeat about whether her species came with a warranty, and people laughed. I'll be honest with you, I smiled too. Because she looked, to all of us, completely and utterly out of place. A soft little thing in a hard little world. We had no idea. The trouble on HFY Station, the real trouble, the thing everybody talked about in low voices, had a name. His name was Karvak. And Karvak was drawn. If you have never seen a drawn, count yourself fortunate. I say that with respect. I say that with a great deal of respect, actually, which you will understand by the end. But the first time you see one, respect is not the first thing you feel. The first thing you feel is that very old part of your brain, the part your ancestors gave you, screaming at you to freeze and hope it hasn't seen you yet. The drawn are apex predators. Not apex predator the way we use it loosely for anything big and mean. I mean apex the way the whole galaxy uses the word when they mean the apex, the top, the thing that other predators are afraid of. They evolved on a hunting world so brutal that just walking across the surface unarmed was, for most species, a death sentence. And the Dran didn't just survive there. They ruled it. Karvek stood nearly 3 meters tall. His body was long and lean and wrong in a way that made your eyes want to slide off it, like it was built for movement in a way that didn't fit anywhere on a station. His hide was a deep charcoal gray with faint bands of dull orange down the spine. His hands ended in claws that could open a pressure door. And his face, I'll never forget his face, had two forward-set eyes the color of cooling embers, eyes that tracked you when you moved even when the rest of him stayed perfectly, horribly still. He had come to Ashfall about a cycle before Myra did, and in that time nobody had learned much about him. He didn't drink with anyone. He didn't talk much. He took hard salvage contracts, the deprec jobs, the ones where you go into a dead ship that might still have live systems, and you come out with something valuable or you don't come out. And he took them alone, because nobody would partner with him. There was a story that a Braxton wrecker had tried to cheat him once. Just once. The Braxton left the station after that. Left in a hurry. Left, some said, missing part of an arm, though nobody could ever say for sure and nobody wanted to ask Karvak to confirm it. So that was the shape of things when Myra Das arrived. A soft little newcomer everybody laughed at, and a hard old killer everybody stepped around. And the strange thing, the thing I still turn over in my mind, is that those two were the only ones on the entire station who didn't seem afraid of each other. It started, like a lot of things on Ashfall, in the mess hall. The mess is the one place everyone has to go, because it's the one place with real food and warm seating, and the station charter, such as it is, says nobody can be turned away from it. So you get every species crammed together, eating shoulder to shoulder or shoulder to whatever passes for a shoulder, and mostly everybody keeps their heads down and their business to themselves. Karvek always sat in the far corner, always the same table, back to the wall, facing the door. And there was an unspoken rule on the station, a rule nobody had ever written down and nobody needed to, that you did not sit at Karvak's table. The Longshadow had been docked for maybe 3 cycles when Myra broke that rule. I was there. I was 2 tables over, eating a bowl of reconstituted grain mash and pretending not to watch, because everybody was pretending not to watch. She came in off a long repair shift, still smelling of coolant hair coming loose from where she'd tied it back, and she was carrying a tray, and she was scanning the mess for a place to sit. And every table was full except one. You could see the moment she realized it. You could see her look at the empty seats across from the big gray killer in the corner, and you could see her do the math, and you could see the whole mess hall hold its breath. She walked over, she set her tray down across from him, she sat. And she said, I heard it, we all heard it because the mess had gone dead silent, she said. Is this seat taken? Karvek looked at her. He looked at her the way a storm looks at a small boat. Those ember eyes just fixed on her, and I swear the temperature of the room dropped. A Vestin cook dropped a ladle behind the counter and the clang made half the hall jump. And Myra Das, this tiny soft 19-year-old human who had to jump to reach her own cargo latch, she looked right back at him and she started eating. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize and scurry away, which is what any sensible creature would have done. She just picked up her utensil and started eating her grain mash like she was sitting across from anybody at all. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Karvak did something none of us had ever seen him do. He went back to his own meal. That was it. That was all. He just let her stay. And slowly, so slowly, the mess hall started breathing again, and the noise came back, and everybody went back to pretending they hadn't been watching. But I'll tell you, that night, everybody on Ashfall Station was talking about the little human who sat at the killer's table and lived. Most of them laughed about it, said she was too stupid to know better, said she'd gotten lucky, said it wouldn't last. I didn't laugh. I don't know why. Something about the way she looked back at him stuck with me. There'd been no challenge in it. No fear, but no challenge either. Just a kind of tired, honest, I have nowhere else to sit and I'm not going to make a big thing of it look. And I think I've had a long time to think about this. I think that's exactly why it worked. I think Karvek had spent his whole life being met with either fear or challenge. And here was this small, soft creature who gave him neither, who just needed a place to sit. It's a small thing, but small things are how big things start. I've fixed enough machines to know that. The whole engine fails because of one loose fitting nobody checked. After that, she sat there every cycle. Not always. Some cycles she worked through the meal or ate in the Longshadow's galley. But when she came to the mess, she went to that corner, and she sat across from Karvak, and the two of them ate in silence, and the rest of us got used to it the way you get used to a strange noise in the ventilation that never turns out to be dangerous. They didn't talk much those first weeks. I know because I made a point of watching, and by then I wasn't the only one. Half the station had a private theory about what was going on. The most popular theory, I'm ashamed to say, was an ugly one, and I won't dignify it. People are people, no matter the species. When they see something they don't understand, they reach for the worst explanation first. But it wasn't anything like that. I know because I finally got close enough to hear. It was maybe the 10th or 11th cycle. I'd taken to eating at the table right beside theirs, telling myself it was because it had the best view of the loading bay schedule board, which was a lie I was very comfortable with. And that cycle, for the first time, I heard Myra Das ask Karvek a question. She said, "What's that word for it in your language? The dead drift. When a ship's power's gone but it's still holding air." Karvak didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low and rough, like two stones grinding together deep underwater. He said a word I couldn't reproduce if I tried, something with a growl in the middle of it. And Myra nodded, very seriously, and she tried to say it back. She butchered it, absolutely butchered it. It came out of her small human mouth sounding like a cough with a hiccup in it, and I braced, because I did not know how a 3-meter apex predator would react to a soft little alien mangling the sacred tongue of his hunting world. Karvek made a sound. It took me a second to understand what it was. It was low, and it rumbled up out of his chest, and it went on for a few seconds, and I realized with a kind of shock that made my grain mash go cold in front of me. He was laughing. The killer of Ashfall Station was laughing, not at her, with her. And she was grinning up at him, unafraid, delighted with herself, and she said, "That bad, huh?" And he made the sound again, and I sat there at my table and I thought, I have no idea what I am looking at. I have no idea what is happening, but I do not think it is what any of us thought. That was the cycle I stopped watching to gossip. That was the cycle I started watching because I actually wanted to understand. Here is what I pieced together over the weeks that followed, from listening, and from the little Myra herself told me once she and I got to talking. Karvek was old for a Dran, which is old by anyone's measure, and he was the last of something. His hunting clan, the family group the Dran organized their entire lives around, was gone. All of it. There had been some kind of catastrophe on a deep salvage contract, a bad one, years before he ever came to Ashfall, and Karvek had been the only one to walk away from it. The only one left. And you have to understand what that means for a Dran. It's not like it is for you or me losing a family. For the Dran, the clan isn't just people you love. It's who you are. Their entire sense of self is built around the pack, around the ones who hunt beside you and eat beside you and guard your back in the dark. A Dran without a clan isn't just grieving. He's something the Dran don't even have a comfortable word for. Something wrong. Something that shouldn't still be moving around. That's why he sat with his back to the wall. That's why he took the solo contracts. That's why the whole galaxy stepped around him like he was a live charge. It wasn't just that he was dangerous. It was that he was the loneliest creature any of us had ever met, and none of us had the sense to see it because we were all too busy being afraid. Everyone except her. Myra had lost people too. She told me this herself, one cycle in the maintenance corridor while we were both waiting on the same part loader. She said it plainly, the way she said most things. Her parents had died when she was young, on a colony ship that never made its destination. She'd grown up in a series of ports and stations, raised by whoever was around, working from the time she was barely old enough to hold a wrench. She said she'd never really had a family either. Just a lot of people who let her hang around until they didn't. So I know what he looks like, she told me, nodding down the corridor toward where I knew Karvak's quarters were. I've seen it in a mirror. You get real good at spotting it. Spotting what? I asked her. She thought about it. Then she said, somebody who used to belong to somebody and doesn't anymore. It leaves a mark. You just have to know where to look. I have carried that sentence with me for the rest of my life. Somebody who used to belong to somebody and doesn't anymore. She was 19 years old when she said it. Now, none of this softened the way the station treated her. If anything, it got worse for a while. Because here's the thing about a place like HFY, it runs on a certain order. There are the strong and the weak, the ones you fear and the ones you push around, and everybody knows their place, and the whole thing stays balanced as long as nobody upsets it. And Myra Das, tiny and soft and human, upset it just by existing. She wasn't supposed to be able to sit with the killer. She wasn't supposed to make him laugh. It broke the order, and there were people on that station who didn't like their order broken, especially not by the smallest, weakest thing on the dock. The worst of them was a Braxton named Dalger. Big, four-armed, mean the way some people are just mean, because it's easy and it gets them things. He ran a crew of wreckers and he'd had his eye on Myra since she first came off the Longshore, and not in any way that was good. He started small, knocking her tray, accidentally bumping her hard enough in the corridor to send her into a wall, making the same tired joke about warranties every time she passed, until the whole crew laughed on cue like it was the funniest thing in the sector. And Myra took it. She took it the way you take weather. She'd pick her tray back up. She'd push off the wall and keep walking. She'd let the joke roll off her and she wouldn't give Dalger the satisfaction of a reaction, and I could see it was costing her, but she never gave it to him. I asked her once why she didn't report it. There were rules, technically. There was a station enforcer, technically, though he was as crooked as everything else. She just gave me a small, flat smile and she said, "Bye." She'd picked up that word from somewhere. She called half the station bye. People like Dalger don't stop because you tell on them. They stop because they run into something they can't push. That's all any of them understand. I didn't know it then, but she was telling me exactly how the whole thing was going to end. The night everything changed started like any other. Third shift. The docks were quiet, or as quiet as HFY ever got. I was in my little office off the main bay, going over a refit schedule and drinking something warm and terrible when I heard the noise. It came from the direction of the fuel gantries. A crash. Then voices raised, ugly, that particular pitch of voices that tells your gut something's wrong before your brain catches up. I've worked docks my whole life. You learn to know the difference between the sound of a party and the sound of trouble. This was trouble. I got up. I told myself I was just going to look. I am a small, slow, cautious creature, remember. Looking is usually as far as I go. I came around the corner of the number 2 gantry, and I saw them. Dalger, 3 of his crew, and Myra backed up against a fuel line housing, her tool bag spilled across the deck. One of her tools skittered off to the side where she couldn't reach it. She'd been on a repair job. That's all it was. She'd been sent down to patch a leak in the number 2 line, a night job alone. The kind of job they gave her because she was the smallest and could fit into the tight spaces, and Dalger and his crew had found her there. Alone, cornered, no mess hall full of witnesses, no killer sitting 2 tables away. I froze. I'll admit it. I froze and I watched, and I hated myself for it even as it was happening because I am not brave and there were 4 of them and they were all bigger than me. Dalger had one of his 4 hands wrapped around Myra's arm. He was leaning down over her, saying something low, and I couldn't hear the words but I could hear the tone, and the tone was the worst thing I have ever heard. It was the tone of somebody who has decided a small thing belongs to them. And Myra, I will remember this until the day I stop breathing. Myra looked him in the eye and she said, clear as anything, "Take your hand off me." She wasn't begging. Her voice didn't shake. She said it like a fact, like a warning she was giving him for his own good. Dalger laughed. His crew laughed. And Dalger leaned in closer and he said something back to her. And whatever it was, it made his crew laugh harder. And his grip tightened on her arm until I saw her face go tight with the pain of it. I opened my mouth. I don't know what I was going to say. I don't know what a small, slow dockmaster like me could have said that would have made any difference against 4 wreckers in the dark. But I never got the chance to say it. Because that was the moment the shadows at the far end of the gantry moved. And Karvek came. I have tried many times to describe how he moved, and I have never once gotten it right. You have to understand a creature that size should not be able to move quietly. 3 meters of muscle and claw and killing weight. But he came down that gantry without a sound. Not a footstep. Not a scrape. The lights flickered, hammering 3 wiring, always the wiring, and in one flicker the far end of the gantry was empty, and in the next flicker he was there, and none of us had seen him cross the distance. I don't think Dalger even knew. Not at first. He was too busy with Myra. It was one of his crew who saw, a smaller Braxton at the edge of the group, and I watched that Braxton's whole body go rigid, watched all 4 of his arms go slack at his sides, watched him make a sound like the air had been let out of him. Dalger turned, and there was Karvek, standing in the flickering light, 3 meters of the thing the whole station feared, those ember eyes fixed and burning and absolutely, terribly calm. And I want to tell you about the calm because the calm was the worst part. If he'd roared, if he'd snarled, that would have been one thing. But he didn't. He just stood there completely still, completely quiet, and looked at the 4 wreckers and the small human they had cornered. And then Karvek spoke. Just 2 words. In common tongue so we'd all understand. His voice was that low grinding stone rumble, and it filled the whole gantry, and it was the quietest, most dangerous sound I have ever heard in my life. He said, "Little sister." The silence after those 2 words was the loudest silence I have ever stood inside of. Because we all understood all at once exactly what they meant. Every species on that station, no matter how different, understood. Little sister. For a Drawn, for a clanless Drawn, the last of his line, the loneliest creature in the sector, there was no word he could have spoken that carried more weight. Clan is everything to them. Clan is who you are. And to name someone clan, to name someone sister, was to draw a line around them and say to the whole universe, this one is mine. This one is under my protection. This one you do not touch. He had claimed her, not as property, as family, as the only family he had left in the whole cold galaxy. And Dalger had his hand around her arm. I saw the understanding hit Dalger's face. I saw the exact moment the big, mean, 4-armed wrecker realized what he had done, and worse, what was about to happen to him for it. All the cruelty drained out of his face, and something much older and much more honest took its place. Fear, pure animal fear. He let go of Myra's arm like it had burned him. And Karvek took 1 step forward. Karvek took 1 step forward, and the whole gantry seemed to lean away from him. I want to be honest about what I expected to happen next. I expected blood. I expected to watch 4 wreckers die in the flickering light, and I expected to spend the rest of my cycles trying not to remember it. Because that is what the Drawn do. That is the whole reason the galaxy steps around them. When one of them decides you have crossed a line, you do not get to walk it back. The line is already crossed. All that's left is the accounting. Dalger's crew ran. I don't blame them. If I'm being truthful, some part of me wanted to run too, and I wasn't even the one he was looking at. The three of them scattered, one leaping the gantry rail down to the deck below, two of them bolting back the way they'd come, all of them making that thin, high sound that big, brave creatures make when the oldest part of their brain finally takes the controls. But Dogger didn't run. I think he wanted to. I think every part of him was screaming to. But Dogger had spent his whole life being the biggest thing in the room, and there was some stubborn, stupid piece of him that couldn't accept that he wasn't anymore. So instead of running, he did the thing that mean creatures always do when they're cornered. He reached for a weapon. He had a cutter on his belt, a plasma cutter, the kind wreckers use to open hull plate, and in a pinch, the kind that'll open a person just as easily. His hand went for it. All that Braxton speed, 4 arms, and one of them dropped to the cutter on his hip and came up with it already lit, that ugly white-blue flame hissing to life in the dark. And here is where it happened. Here is the moment I've told 100 times and still can't get through cleanly. Myra moved first. Not away. Toward. Toward Dogger, toward the lit cutter, toward the whole mess of it. This tiny, soft human girl who'd been cornered and grabbed and threatened, she pushed off the fuel housing and she got herself between Dogger and Karvak. Between them. She put her small body directly in the path of the apex predator's charge, and she threw up both her hands and she screamed one word. Karvak, no. I have thought about that moment more than almost any other in my life. I've turned it over and over, trying to understand it, and I think I finally do, and I want to try to explain it to you the way I've explained it to myself. Everybody on that station thought Myra was weak, the smallest, softest thing on the dock, something to laugh at, something to push. And when Karvak named her sister and stepped forward, I think every one of us in our hearts expected her to hide behind him, to let the big, frightening thing do the frightening work. That's what the weak do. They find something stronger and they get behind it. She didn't get behind him. She got in front of him. Because she understood something the rest of us had missed completely. She understood that if Karvak killed Dogger, even a piece of filth like Dogger, even in her defense, it wouldn't save Karvak. It would finish him. The station enforcer was crooked, but he wasn't blind. A drone tearing a wrecker apart on the fuel gantries was the one thing even Ashfall couldn't look past. They'd space him, or worse, and Karvak would go to whatever the drone believe comes after this the same way he'd lived, alone. The last of his clan, dying for a killing that didn't even need to happen. And Myra Das, 19 years old, would not allow it. So she stood in front of 3 meters of grief and claw and killing weight, this soft little thing he had just claimed as the only family he had left, and she held up her hands and she told him no. Karvak, she said again, softer now, the word almost lost in the hiss of Dogger's cutter. No, not for this, not for him. He's not worth what it'd cost you. Look at me. Look at me. I don't know if you've ever watched something enormous stop. A loader that's already committed to a swing. A ship coming in too hot. It's not a clean thing. It's a fight. All that mass wants to keep going, and stopping it means forcing every part of it to argue with itself at once. That's what I watched happen in Karvak. He had been moving. That step forward was the front edge of something much larger, a whole body of ancient instinct that had already decided how this ended. Everything in him was built for exactly this, a threat to the clan, a claw around a sister's arm, a weapon lit in the dark. His people had spent 100,000 years becoming the thing that answers that. It was not a decision for him. It was gravity. And a soft little human stood in front of him and told him to fight gravity. I saw it cost him. I saw those ember eyes, still locked on Dogger over the top of Myra's dark head, and I saw the muscle bunch and shift under that charcoal hide, and I saw him shaking, actually shaking, 3 meters of apex predator, trembling with the effort of not doing the thing every fiber of him was screaming to do. But he looked at her. She'd asked him to look at her, and he did. He dropped those burning eyes from Dalgar down to the small human standing in his path with her hands up, and something in his face. I don't have the anatomy to read a drawn the way I'd read one of my own, but I swear I saw it. Something in his face broke and reformed into something else. The killing calm went out of the ember eyes, and what came into them instead was worse in a way and better. It was fear, not fear of Dalgar, fear for her. Fear that she was standing between him and a lit plasma cutter, and all it would take was one bad second. "Move," he said, that grinding stone voice but low now, almost gentle. "Little sister, move behind me." "No," she said. "Move." "No," she said again, and she didn't move, and I understood that she was not going to, not if he asked her 100 times, because she had made the same decision about him that he had made about her. She'd drawn her own line. He was clan now, hers, and she was not going to let him destroy himself, not even to protect her, not even a little. Two of the loneliest creatures in the sector, each one standing between the other and ruin, each one refusing to move. And behind Myra, forgotten for one whole second, Dalgar decided to be a coward one last time. He lunged. Not at Karvak. He wasn't insane. He lunged at Myra, the small one, the weak one, the one with her back to him and her hands up and her whole attention on the predator in front of her. He came at her with the lit cutter, 4 arms and all his mean Braxton weight, aiming to grab her, to use her, to put her between himself and the killer as a shield to bargain his way off that gantry alive. I shouted. I know I shouted because my throat was raw for 2 cycles after. Whatever I shouted, it didn't matter. Because Myra had known. She'd known the whole time. That's the thing I didn't understand until later when I could think straight. She hadn't turned her back on Dalgar out of trust. She'd turned her back on him as bait. She knew exactly what a creature like him would do the second her attention seemed to be elsewhere. She'd counted on it. When Dalgar lunged, Myra dropped. Straight down, all at once, folding herself to the deck like her strings had been cut. And Dalgar's grab closed on empty air where her body had been, and his own momentum carried him forward, right over the top of her, right into the space she'd been filling. Right into the space between her and Karvak. She'd moved. In the only way that mattered in the last possible instant, she'd moved, not backward, not away, but down and out of the line, and in doing it she'd opened the line she'd been blocking. She hadn't disobeyed him. She'd waited until obeying would do the most good, and then she'd pulled the one creature on that gantry who actually deserved what was coming directly into the path of it. I have never, before or since, seen anyone that fast think that clearly. Dalgar realized his mistake in the air. You could see it. That same drop of understanding I'd watched hit his face before, hitting it again, final this time. He'd thrown himself past his own shield and into the reach of the thing he'd been trying to shield himself from. Karvak caught him. I'm not going to describe it in detail. I've made that choice over the years about which parts of this story I tell and which parts I keep. Some of you might want the detail. I understand that. But I was there, and I'll tell you that it was over very, very fast, and that fast is a mercy, and that's all I'll say about the how of it. What I'll tell you instead is what it sounded like when it stopped. It got quiet, the kind of quiet that is wait. Somewhere a fuel line ticked as it cooled. The gantry lights flickered, always the wiring, and in the flicker I saw Karvak standing over what was left of Dalgar, and I saw Myra picking herself up off the deck, and I saw that neither of them was looking at the body. They were looking at each other. Myra got to her feet. She had a scrape down one cheek from where she'd dropped to the deck, a thin line of red, and her hair had come all the way loose now, and she was breathing hard. And Karvak turned from what he'd done and looked at her the way I imagine a creature looks at the only thing in the universe it has left. And Myra, small, soft, bleeding, 19 years old, having just watched her clan brother kill a man an arm's length from her. Myra walked up to that 3-meter apex predator, and she reached up, and she put one small human hand flat against the charcoal hide of his chest. "You stopped," she said. Her voice cracked when she said it. It was the first time I'd ever heard it crack. When I asked you to, you stopped. She was crying now, I realized quietly, the way people cry when the thing they're crying about is too big for noise. Nobody, Karvek, nobody's ever, you stopped. And Karvek, the loneliest creature in the sector, the last of his line, reached down with one hand that could open a pressure door, and he touched the top of her head. So carefully, so gently, like she was the most breakable thing in creation, and he had just now, this very second, remembered how to be gentle at all. You did not run, he said, that grinding rumble gone soft as I'd ever heard it. They laughed at you, all of them, and you did not run, you stayed, you sat at my table. A pause, those ember eyes. Clan does not run from clan. No, Myra agreed, and she laughed even while she cried, a wet, broken little laugh. No, I guess they don't. I was still standing at the corner of the gantry, forgotten, when the enforcer finally came. His name was Call. A Vestin, gray and long past caring about most things, the kind of station enforcer you get on a station like Ashfall, not because he was good at the job but because nobody better wanted it. He came down the gantry with two of his people, and a stun lance he clearly hoped he wouldn't have to use, and he took one look at the body, and one look at Karvak, and one long look at the small human standing at the predator's side with her hand still resting against his hide, and I watched him do the same math the rest of us had already done. This was the moment. This was where it all could still go wrong. All Myra's cleverness, all the standing in front and dropping at the last instant, all of it came down to what Call wrote in his report. A Dron had killed a Braxton on the fuel gantries. That was the fact. Facts like that got people spaced. I did the only brave thing I did that whole night, and it wasn't much. I stepped out of the corner. Call, I said, my voice came out steadier than I felt. I saw it, all of it, from the start. Call turned those flat gray Vestin eyes on me. Did you? I did. And then I told him. I told him about Dalger and his crew cornering a lone tech on a night job. I told him about the hand around her arm and the tone in Dalger's voice. I told him about the lit cutter, and here I made sure to point, because the cutter was still there on the deck where it had fallen, still faintly warm, and a lit plasma cutter changes a story from murder to a girl about to be gutted on the fuel line. I told him Dalger had lunged at her with it. I told him the human had tried to stop the whole thing, had actually gotten in the way to stop it, and that the Dron had only moved when the wrecker came at her with a live blade. It was all true, every word. I want you to know I didn't lie for them. I didn't have to. The truth was on our side for once, and all I had to do was stand up and say it out loud in front of the one person who could ignore it if nobody made him look. And then something happened that I didn't expect. Another voice said, "He's right." It was one of the Longshadow crew, Myra's crew, come down at the noise, and then another of them said it too, and then a Vestin cook who'd followed the commotion from the mess, and then, one by one, others, people who'd seen pieces of it. People who'd seen Dalger push Myra around the docks for weeks and never said a word, standing up now to say what they'd seen, because the small human who'd sat at the killer's table had done something none of them ever had, and they knew it, and they were done being quiet about it. Even one of Dalger's own crew, the smaller Braxton, the one who'd gone rigid with fear at the sight of Karvak, even he stepped forward, shame all over his face, and said it. Said Dalger had it coming, said they'd cornered her, said it was self-defense. Call looked around at all of us, all these different species. All these creatures who spent their whole lives keeping their heads down and their business to themselves, standing up together on a fuel gantry in the middle of third shift to defend a soft little human and the monster she'd claimed. And Call, who was gray and tired and past caring about most things, sighed a very long sigh. Self-defense, he said. Wrecker drew a live cutter on a tech. Tech's clan guardian intervened. He looked at Karvak and something almost like respect crossed his flat gray face. That's what I'm writing. Anybody want to argue it? Nobody did. That was the night everything changed on HFY Station. Not all at once. Stations don't change all at once, but it changed. The story went everywhere by the next cycle, of course. It got bigger every time it was told, the way stories do. By the end of the week, there were versions where Myra had fought off all four wreckers herself, versions where Karvak had thrown Dogger clean across the docking ring, versions that had almost nothing to do with what actually happened. I stopped correcting them after a while. People believe what they need to believe. And what they needed to believe, it turned out, was that the smallest, weakest thing on the station had turned out to be the strongest of all of them, in the way that actually counted. Because here's the thing they all understood, even the ones who told it wrong. Myra hadn't won because she was strong. She'd won because she was kind. Because when the whole station laughed at her, she'd looked at the loneliest creature in the sector and seen not a monster but somebody who used to belong to somebody and didn't anymore. Because she'd sat down at his table when it would have been so much easier and safer to sit anywhere else. Because she'd stood in front of him when it would have been so much easier and safer to stand behind. She'd made a family out of the one creature nobody else would even sit near. And when the moment came, that family had stood up for her, first Karvak with his claws, and then, unbelievably, the whole rest of us with our voices. Kindness had done that, not strength. Kindness, held on to stubbornly by a soft little thing in a hard little world, long past the point where anybody would have blamed her for letting it go. They stayed on HFY another cycle, the two of them. Myra finished out her contract with the Longshadow, and when the Longshadow moved on, she didn't go with it. She stayed, and so did Karvak, and the two of them took a set of quarters together in Habring 3, the flickering ring, the one nobody ever fixed, and they started taking salvage contracts as a pair. The deep-wreck jobs, the dangerous ones. The ones Karvak used to take alone because nobody would partner with him. He didn't take them alone anymore. I used to watch them head out, the two of them, the little human and the enormous predator, walking down the dock toward the airlock side by side. She'd be talking, usually. She was always talking. She'd never met a silence she couldn't fill, and he'd be listening. This 3-meter killer bending his whole head down to catch the words of a creature a third his size, and every so often that low, rumbling laugh would roll out of his chest, and the whole dock would still go quiet for a second when it did, out of old habit. But it wasn't the frightened quiet anymore. It was something else, something more like wonder. I asked her once near the end, before they finally moved on to bigger stations and better contracts, and a life I hope was long and good, I asked her if she'd known. That night on the gantry, if she'd known he would stop. She was quiet for a while, longer than usual for her. No, she finally said. I didn't know, nobody could have known that. She looked down the dock toward where Karvak was checking their gear for a run, and her face did something soft. But I knew that if I got behind him, he'd never stop. He'd already lost everything once. If he killed for me and it finished him, he'd have lost everything twice, and this time it'd have been my fault. She shook her head. I couldn't get behind him I had to give him a reason to be more than what everyone was so sure he was. That's all any of them ever needed. A reason. Nobody'd ever bothered to give him one. And if he hadn't stopped, I asked, because I had to, if you'd been wrong. She smiled at me. That small, flat, tired smile I knew so well by then. The scrape on her cheek had healed to a thin, pale line she'd carry for the rest of her life. Then I'd have been wrong, she said simply. But he wasn't a monster. I was sure of that much. And you don't leave family standing alone in the dark just because you might be wrong about them. She shrugged. Somebody sat down at my table once when I was small and nobody wanted me around. I never forgot it, figured it was my turn. I don't know where they are now. It's been many cycles. I like to think they're out there still, the little human and the last of his clan, taking the dangerous contracts nobody else will take, the two of them against the dark, neither one ever having to be alone in it again. I like to think that somewhere out there, a soft little human named Myra Das is still talking too much. and a 3-meter apex predator named Karvak is still bending his whole head down to listen, and still laughing that low, rumbling laugh at all the ways she mangles the sacred tongue of his hunting world. I like to think of them as family, because that's what they were. That's what they made themselves into, out of nothing, out of two kinds of loneliness that had no business fitting together and somehow fit perfectly. Everyone laughed at the tiny human girl. I laughed too that first day, and I've been ashamed of it ever since. But I was there the day the apex predator called her little sister. I heard those two words in that flickering light on that fuel gantry, and I felt the whole shape of the galaxy shift a little bit around them. And here is the thing I've learned, the thing I tell the young ones now when they ask me why an old dockmaster gets so worked up over a story about two people he barely knew. The strongest thing in the universe was never the claws. It was never the size, or the fear, or the killing weight. The strongest thing in the universe is a small hand held flat against a monster's chest, telling him, believing, that he is more than the worst the galaxy expects of him. She saw a brother where everyone else saw a beast. And because she did, because one small stubborn creature refused to look away, a beast remembered how to be a brother. That's the whole story, that's all of it. I don't tell it for them anymore, I don't think. I tell it for the rest of us. For everyone out there right now, sitting alone at a table, sure that nobody's going to come. Somebody might. You just have to leave the seat open.